The first night I slept in my new house, a thunderstorm sounded like someone knocking on the windows of my past. I woke to the smell of wet mulch and the ache of a city I'd abandoned, but what really pulled me out of bed was the sound of voices, dozens of them, like a swarm gathering at the edge of my property. Lanterns bobbed through the rain, men and women in HOA polos, urgent and loud, pushing toward the lake I had stared at for months while I signed papers and imagined a quieter life. They stormed my yard before I could find my shoes, chanting about rights and shared access, demanding that I open the lake. I stepped onto the porch soaked, shoelaces trailing, and the leader pointed right at me like I'd stolen their son. And at the end, "Stay with me, I'm going to tell you something important that you need to hear." They called themselves the board. They called themselves stewards. They called themselves neighbors. They did not call themselves wrong. Flashlights cut through the rain, carving their faces into hard masks. One woman, Carolina, the treasurer, I would later learn carried a clipboard as if it were a weapon. They told me they had a legal easement, that the docks belonged to every property around the lake, that my fence violated a covenant, that I had to open the path now. The irony was bright and sharp. These were the same people who had complained about backyard lights, about my kids' laughter, about my garden gate sticking out 2 inches too far. Now they stood in my yard like invading judges. I almost laughed. The house had come as a package, a title, a deed, a thin line on a map that gave me more power than I expected. While they rehearsed the words community access, I watched the leader step onto the dock, toes over rotten wood, feeling the tremor under his weight. He announced the HOA intent to reclaim the shoreline. Their bravado filled the night like fog. "I don't think you understand what you're asking," I said, voice calm enough to irritate them. "This parcel may sit beside the lake, but the docks are on pilings driven into my property lines." Silence, then a chorus of disbelief. The clipboard woman hissed a warning. They'd done this before: go loud, overwhelm, shame the new owner into submission. But I had come for something bigger than silence. I had come to be seen. So I pulled out the papers, the survey, the old deeds that smelled like something my grandfather would have kept in a cedar chest, and I read to them until the words became thunder. You could see the mood shift. The rope of certainty they wore began to fray. The leader demanded I show proof. I offered the survey, the notarized map, an obscure county easement record that traced ownership like a map of bones. The storm stopped pretending. Thunder punctuated the paragraphs. They murmured about attorneys and bylaws. I told them I had already hired one, quietly and without spectacle, not to fight them, but to protect what my family had just bought with bloods, wet savings, and late-night budgets. They left that night with their flashlights turned down, but they left a warning that would follow me for months. You can expect petitions. You can expect votes. We will not be blocked from our lake. The board's caravan disappeared into the mist with a promise and a threat folded together. What they didn't know was that control of a dock is not just timber and nails. Docks are neighbor lore, the place where a child first learns to fish, where a wedding cake might be set for a summer elopement, where secrets are passed on the hush of a summer night. The docks carry weight beyond their planks. I knew that if the fight was framed as a neighbor versus neighbor moral tale, I would lose. People rally behind nostalgia, so I rewrote the battle. I hosted a summer cleanup not as a boast, but by leaving a note. If any neighbors want to help keep the shoreline, bring gloves and stories. A few came: the mailman, a retired teacher, an older couple who'd lived on the lake longer than most. We hauled driftwood, shoveled sand back into its place, and replaced 2 rotten boards on the dock I reluctantly allowed them to use under permit. I posted photos of our work like an offering to the neighborhood altar. Slowly, the narrative shifted from entitled HOA to custodian and neighbor. They could not vilify every face that had helped sweep the shoreline. When the board circulated petitions, signatures came back with notes. Thank you for saving the shoreline. We appreciate the effort to repair, keep the docks safe for kids. The leader's rhetoric about communal rights started to sound hollow when the community's stories belonged to me too. But the board did not back down. They escalated with meeting after meeting, a formal letter, a vote, a complaint with county planners. I matched escalation with quiet records, permits, improvement plans, a history of maintenance. I sent polite but firm replies. I never shouted. I learned that the most effective revenge in these suburban tragedies is procedural, patience wrapped in paperwork. When the HOA lawyer finally read the deed aloud in a public hearing, their argument about customary use dissolved in the light of recorded surveys and prior case law. Victory did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived in the small things: a clerk's signature, a corrected plat, a checkmark in an online county database. The leader of the board stopped showing up at meetings as often. The clipboard woman retired from her post. They still called occasionally, polite and low, asking if there might be future access under set terms. I said yes on paper, with insurance, and with boundaries we all could live with. In the end, the lake belonged to everyone who loved it responsibly, and my dock stood as a testament to the messy, slow justice of rules and human stories. I learned that controlling a dock was less about dominion and more about patience, about turning neighbors into witnesses, and about telling a different story than the one they came to yell into the rain. The first crisp morning of fall came with a strange stillness, the kind that settles only after a storm that's run out of fury. The lake was glass, the kind of smooth you could see your whole life reflected in, if you stared long enough. I stood at the edge of the dock the HOA had tried so hard to claim, hands in my pockets, breath fogging the chilly air. For the first time since the chaos began, I felt peace. But peace has a way of inviting the final test. 3 cars rolled slowly down the gravel lane, the kind of synchronized crawl that made my stomach tighten. The HOA board, or what was left of it, Carolina, the treasurer, the retired leader, and a newer face wearing the type of nervous smile that said he'd drawn the short straw for this mission. They didn't storm in this time. They didn't come with clipboards or bylaws or threats cleverly disguised as community values. They came with something heavier. Regret. Carolina cleared her throat, her voice trembling more than the leaves behind her. We wanted to speak respectfully this time. Her eyes fell to the lake. We acted out of panic, out of habit. We thought we were protecting the community, but maybe we were really protecting our own ego. The retired leader, the one who'd marched onto my dock in the storm like a general claiming land, stepped forward. His face had softened, age had caught up with him, or maybe humility had. You kept this place alive, he said quietly. The shoreline cleanup, the repairs, the safety railing you added so kids wouldn't fall in. You didn't have to do any of that. He paused. You did more for this lake than we ever did while we were too busy policing everyone. The apology wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it landed with the weight of a decade's worth of unspoken tension in this neighborhood. I nodded. I didn't fix the lake for you, I said. I fixed it because it deserved better, and so did the people living around it. The new board member stepped forward with a sealed envelope. White, plain, unassuming. He held it out like it was a peace treaty carved from fragile glass. This is a revised agreement. No demands, no forced access, just a proposal. His voice steadied. We'd like to create a shared maintenance program, voluntary, not enforced. You keep full ownership, your rights stay intact. But if one day you want supervised community access events, we'd love to rebuild things the right way. The right way. Those words hummed inside me like the wooden planks beneath my feet. I opened the envelope. The new agreement wasn't a trap or a power grab. It was honest, balanced, respectful. Something that could actually heal the fractures in this lakeside community. I looked up. I'll sign it, I said, but only if we start fresh. No sides, no old grudges. The retired leader exhaled like he'd been underwater for years. That's all we want. And for the first time since the night they stormed onto my property, I believed him. Weeks passed, and something strange began to happen. Neighbors I barely knew started waving when they kayaked by. Kids threw stones from the shore and shouted thank yous for the new safety signs I installed. Couples asked if they could take anniversary photos at sunset. The lake became what it was always meant to be, not a battleground, but a bridge. The dock wasn't just wood anymore. It was a symbol of boundaries honored, of ownership respected, of revenge transformed into something far quieter, far stronger, influence. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it arrives softly, in agreements signed without shaking hands, in neighbors finally talking to one another, in the calm water that keeps reflecting the truth no one wanted to admit. Power, used responsibly, becomes legacy, and that little lake, once drenched in conflict, became the calmest chapter of my life. Not because I won, but because I learned that sometimes the real victory is turning enemies into witnesses and witnesses into neighbors.